All right, fifth grade. So today is the last day that I want to talk about the American Revolution. I kind of want to talk about, how the Americans won. What was kind of the timeline of events that led to the Americans winning the war. All right. So, spoiler alert. What we learned yesterday is we learned that the colonists, who now we call the Americans, became a new country, right? The United States of America. They beat the British, and that is why we have our own country today. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about, like I said, how they won, how this even happened, okay? So, first thing, we're going to start over here in 1775. If you remember 1775, that was when Battle of Lexington and Concord, okay? So, the Battle of Lexington and Concord happened in 1775. That was the first battle of the American Revolution. If you remember, it was how the British came over and were trying to, I have a yawn. The British came over and were trying to take illegal guns away from the Americans. And they didn't find any, right? And so this kind of started this whole war. So if you can imagine, if this never happened, if the British never went to go find those illegal guns that didn't even exist, this may not have even happened, this entire war, which is insane to think about. Okay, 1775. 1776. The Americans are getting crushed in the war, okay? So this was a very bad year for the Americans. The battles that they were fighting in, they were just losing big time. They were losing a lot of men. They did not have a lot of weapons and food to make sure the army was good. It was just a big nightmare. It was not going very well. All right. However, in 1777, we talked about how there's another very important war. We talked about that on Monday. This was the Battle of Saratoga. And the Americans are feeling better, right? They're feeling better about how things are going. Okay, so they win the Battle of Saratoga. That was a big win for them. They were able to get to boost their morale, their attitude. They felt better about all of this. Okay. And if you remember, after the Battle of Saratoga, something very important happens. Not only the Americans are feeling better about the war, but also France sends the French, they send supplies and troops to help the Americans. All right, so after the Battle of Saratoga, the King of France is like, interesting. It looks like you guys might actually be able to win. You know what would really help you? Some supplies, maybe some troops too. And of course, the Americans are like, yes, definitely, we will definitely take that. So that's what happened in 1778. And then we flash forward here 4 years to 4 years. Goodness gracious. That is why Mr. Lund does not teach math, huh? Fast forward 3 years to 1781. All right, 1781. Americans win. Battle of Yorktown. Cornwallis surrenders. Right. So General Cornwallis, who we learned about yesterday. Remember, he's the one with kind of that fun name. Fun, kind of weird, kind of goofy name. And so in 1781, this is when the Americans win that Battle of Yorktown. Cornwallis, who is kind of the general for the king, he surrenders. The war is over, right? There are no more colonies. No such thing as the 13 colonies anymore. Now that they won the war, they are officially the United States of America. All right. Okay. And then the last thing here, 1783, the last thing that I do want to talk about. We're not going to talk too much about this. So there's a usually when a war ends, there's always a treaty afterwards, right? So there's a treaty that says, okay, now that the war is over, here's what's going to happen. Here is what one side won. Here's what the other side lost. Okay, so Treaty of Paris signed. The war is over. All right. So Treaty of Paris was kind of the two sides, the Americans and the British, sitting down after this war and saying, okay, now the war is over. Here's what's going to happen. Okay, so if we just take a look here really quick. See, if we look up Treaty of, you can see all of these treaties. These are all after wars. All right, so Treaty of Versailles, I believe, was after World War II. After World War I, excuse me. Yep, so the Treaty of Versailles was after World War I. A bunch of countries came together, and they had a treaty, and they got together and made some agreements. Okay, so we got the Treaty of Paris, 1763. Okay, oops, that's not 1763. That was from after the 7 Years' War. So we're looking at the 83. Okay. All right, so here's what it was. Ending the War of the American Revolution based on a 1782 treaty, the agreement recognized U.S. independence and granted the U.S. significant western territory. All right, so if you remember, one thing that happened after the 7 Years' War was the British did not let them move into that nice land. After this treaty here, they said, we can't stop you from moving over there. All right, so if we look at some maps here, after the Treaty of 1783, here's the Ohio River Valley right here. The Americans own this entire area. Something else that was very interesting, a very large portion of what today we would call Minnesota is also owned by the United States at this point in 1783. Okay, right here, St. Paul is about right there, and so St. Paul actually belonged to the United States at this time, and that's why St. Paul actually, there's a lot of very old buildings here, because a lot of people wanted to move out to this new, really nice area that nobody else lived in. Obviously, Native Americans lived over here, and that became a problem for Native Americans because this was their land, but also the Americans wanted this land. You can see that the British now really only owned Canada. Okay, they really only owned Canada, and actually, let's see here, Canadian independence. Okay, so they actually had to fight for their independence as well. So 1867, about 100 years later, the British colonies all merged into form one country called Canada. All right, so yeah. They didn't actually fight in a war. It was just kind of granted to them. The British kind of understood that they wanted to give them their freedom back. But this is the American Revolution here. A lot of revolutions around the world to fight against the king. He was in charge of everything, and everybody kind of fought back. All right, so that is the American Revolutionary War. Now, tomorrow, what we're going to talk about is what they're going to do now, right? What they were was just a bunch of people with a lot of ideas that they didn't like the king, right? And now they have a whole country to themselves. What are they going to do? How are they going to make this work? And we'll start talking about that tomorrow. All right, any questions, ask Ms. V.